Hey everybody, it's the Mad Master here, doing this video, and it's kind of an off-the-cuff video about the virus that's going on in the pandemic and the subsequent panic that has happened from both the left and the right. And well, that was the right, from your point of view anyways. So this is going to have some controversial statements. Now, I will say, and I must say, that I think that there's an overreaction to some extent on a certain level with certain paradigms with regards to this pandemic. Now, that does not mean that I don't believe that there shouldn't be a lockdown or anything like that. Or, I believe in the lockdown to some extent. Now, keeping things in perspective, though, with these recent studies that have come out that have said that the amount of infected could be 50 to 100, not 50, like 25 to 85% more than we knew because of asymptomatic carriers. That's going to be looked back on in history as overreaction to some extent. Now, that doesn't mean that it will be, and if it was in the United States before, because I may have had it. Excuse my sniffling, by the way. I just had really spicy Chinese food. I'm not sick with the virus. It's kind of ironic that I'm sniffling in the video about this, though. So, if it happened, and I may have had it, I might do a separate video about that, about my symptoms and why I think I may have had it and stuff. It was a really weird time for me, too, when I was sick, because there were some things going on in my life that were kind of weird. But anyway, so so I think that there is this pendulum being swung in these directions. And actually, if you're a fan of the reality transurfing book, it's kind of a weird book, but they talk about pendulums. This is definitely a pendulum, if you know what I'm talking about. This is definitely a pendulum. This pandemic is definitely a pendulum. So I think that there is a danger in this pandemic of people's civil liberties being curtailed. Now, it doesn't mean that I support all these protests going on around the country now, because some of these people are just dullards, and they don't really know about how politics really work, or, even some of them are ignorant about science. I'm just going to say this, that I understand the frustration that caused these protests. Like, you've got to consider, like, some of these people are not that old, haven't had a lot of people that died of the virus, that may have already had the virus, and had been asymptomatic. You go through that and you're like, why are they doing this? I understand that. Now, what I'm about to get into is kind of a really interesting kind of point of view, philosophical thing that I wanted to mention. So I think after 9/11, we definitely overreacted or attacked the Constitution in many ways that we've never recovered from. So that's my fear with this. And Edward Snowden just did an interview, which I mentioned in my previous video about this, which I should post a link to on both videos, and I promise to do that. So he fears a lot of what's going on with this and what may happen. And I do too. So even though he still believes, 1, that the virus exists, 2, that it's a serious virus, 3, that we should do things about it, but there's still questions to be asked. And I think, looking back on now, that there's questions about how they track deaths, obviously, which we should talk about, right? We should talk about the fact that people that were seriously like in hospice about something else will happen to contract the virus and then die, and then they'll count it as a cause of death, the virus. Now, my one question is, would they have died anyway, or did they have mild symptoms from the virus and died? Are they still counted? That's a relevant question. So that's a relevant question. Another question we need to ask is, why are people talking about 18-month lockdowns and social distancing when it's found that all these asymptomatic carriers may have had it? It's like, why are we even entertaining these notions? You know. And another question we need to ask is if these rumors are true about them, these kickbacks supposedly that doctors get or whatever from diagnosing this or whatever. I don't know if that's true. There's a lot of these conspiracy theories that are patently probably false, you know, regarding the, I'm not going to mention, but, you know, it has something to do with cell phones. That's probably just silly stuff. But some of the questions, and by the way, that whole thing, my theory is a lot of conspiracy theories go around that are really crazy. And then those crazy ones are given more prominence when other things are obviously relevant and still part of this, like, these questions that people ask about these certain things. Like, for example, GMOs. Are GMOs going to make you grow into the swamp thing without powers? Just, you know, there's a question. I read a lot of comics, okay. So, probably not. But does the company Monsanto, I'll just say it, do a lot of unethical things? Could they have could Roundup be dangerous and all this stuff? Yeah. But they're going to talk about the crazier people that may be anti-vax and anti-GMO and give those people prominence with a conspiracy theory thing. And then they're going to ignore the other stuff because, oh, that's just part of that, right? That's how this stuff works. So with regards to the conspiracy theories about the C virus, some of it very well may be true, but not in the way that people talk about. Of course, not in the way the crazier people talk about. There's been some really interesting videos on the Corbett report, James Corbett. I don't really know what I think about all his politics or his motivations or even a lot of the conspiracy theories he talks about in his videos about this. But I think there's some relevant points to be made. We need to just, like, be selective about this and kind of look at this and sift through it in a critical way. That said, I think, you know, after 9/11, you know, I can't trust the government again after 9/11. I'm sorry. Because Donald Rumsfeld and Time Magazine, they did this thing about what Osama's supposed fortress in a cave would look like, theoretically, or probably would. They had this diagram. I wish I could get this magazine article and just post it somewhere because it was really hilarious looking back on it now. It has this diagram of all these different rooms in this cave and all these different, like, command centers for the Al-Qaeda and all this stuff. And it was like something out of G.I. Joe from the 80s, like Cobra Commander or Serpentor's Fortress. You know, you could buy it as a play set. This was Osama's supposed, like, command center. It's like, you know, you can't even make this stuff. Well, people did make this stuff up. Like, G.I. Joe made this stuff up. It just looked like something you would open it up, you know, this diagram. It's like they almost, like, copied it from, like, the instructions from a G.I. Joe Fortress toy, you know, play set or something. By the way, I'm into comics, I'm into toys, so I'm going to be doing references about that in my videos, but I think it's hilarious. So after we found out he was probably just living like a hermit in a cave with very little, probably not even electricity at the time, it just made those claims laughable. So when the government says things, I question them. That's just the way it goes, or corporations or whatever. So with this thing, we found that some of the initial estimates of deaths may be off. Now, there are a lot of deaths happening, supposedly. And I believe they probably are. You know, whatever definition they give. But this undue focus on this hysteria, I think people need to be more scientific about it in the media. And we should try to emphasize good news. Just like the manifesting stuff that I've been into. We have to manifest the good. Think about this great plan. You know, there's excellent plan to reopen the country is getting momentum or something, and that should be the headlines across the media, because we need to really think about this. So the right wing thinks about the economic consequences of the lockdown. The left wing thinks about, the fear of the virus, right? So this kind of got me thinking about 9/11 and now. And I think a lot of ways, this is the left wing's 9/11. Now, libertarians, true libertarians, civil libertarians, always expressed questions about 9/11, and they are now as well, about their civil liberties and stuff. Right to assemble, freedom of speech, you name it. So that's always been a factor throughout all these crises. So there's this, there was this thing I was thinking about with regards to Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. So Nazi Germany, they called Germany the fatherland. Okay. And Soviet Russia, they called the motherland. It's this maternalistic consciousness that is in the right or paternalistic in the right and the left. And it's like this this archetype. I don't know what I would call this. It's just this paradigm that they live in. So the left is more scared of scientific things right now. So it's like your mother doesn't want you to get pneumonia, so she'll turn off the fan if it's cold, if you have a window open or something, right? Your father doesn't want you to associate with some group of hooligans that are at your high school, and if they do, they'll give you a spanking, but the mother will lock you in your room, right? So this is I was thinking about this. So this is a weird theory I have. So with regards to the left, they're more on this maternalistic side of reality, and the right is more on this paternalistic, like, the harsh sentences for drugs, or, and they're more socially motivated as far as hysteria goes, or as far as threats to humanity. They're more afraid of people, the brown people across the sea, right? The left is more scared of scientific stuff, viruses, global warming, blah, 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 So you have these two sides, right? And that is I haven't really formulated the rest of these theories, but I think this is like something that I've been thinking about. And it's very interesting. And at least I think it's interesting. I hope you do too. So that's what I got to say about that. The left has been acting. I don't mean by the left, I don't mean the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party signed off on the Patriot Act and all that stuff back in the day. But the dissident left, like, your Democracy Nows or Noam Chomsky's and all this stuff, they questioned this stuff from the beginning, right? And I did too. So, and as far as 9/11 goes. But now that part of the left is still lockstep with the rest of the left as far as this goes. The right is actually asking more questions this time around about what will happen. And the mainstream right is it permeates through the mainstream right wing. It would be right over here, but the mainstream right is asking more questions. I mean, they outright denied it before, but which is bullshit, I'll admit. But in some ways, because I don't know, we have to ask questions, but questions do go too far, of course. So the mainstream right, the fringe pushes through the mainstream right, just as a fringe far left, whatever you want to call it, dissident left, does permeate through the left as well. So, but it took a while longer with 9/11 because people didn't really start to ask questions until the Iraq War, which is unfortunate because I was asking questions from the beginning. I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but there was stuff from the beginning I did not get. And this gives me a similar funny feeling, I will admit. And does that make me a skeptic or a COVIDiot? Well, maybe you can call me that. I want answers, right? I have unanswered questions with this whole thing. Of course, being a mysterious illness and all this stuff, there's going to be a lot of mystery, So I think we need to think about these things. I think we need to ask these questions. We need to ask if, and the only way to ask these questions, obviously, maybe I'm on board with this whole thing. You're going to call me, you're going to say I'm probably like part of the problem because I think we should do this. But I think antibody testing is the best way. And we're already seeing results from that the hysteria is exaggerated with the antibody test, because New York said, even Cuomo came out and said, oh, we found out this is less deadly than we thought. 0.5. He did this in a speech. He actually said this. The Stanford study. There was a study in a town in Germany, study in Iceland, just all over the world, that more people have this or have had it than was previously known. And less people have died of it. So does that justify ending the lockdowns? Eventually, yeah. Not an indefinite lockdown or indefinite social distancing like Ezekiel Emanuel said, or some of these people that are, And, like I said in my last video, people are in these jobs, they're in these bureaucracies, they're in these pendulums, if you want to talk about reality transurfing again. And they don't have any other ideological... they're so stuck in their ways. It's so stuck in this thing. It's not a conspiracy per se. It's just this thing that happens. They're hidden upon this wall in their minds. And, one person that has actually been surprisingly less hysterical has been Anthony Fauci, and Deborah Birx have been not that hysterical. They just state the facts. But I don't know. There could be an agenda. There could be a conspiracy. Some extent, but I think more it's, I think Alan Moore had it. I don't know what the quote was from Alan Moore, the writer, comic book writer and writer, by the way. And half of our DC films are based on his ideas nowadays, but he wants no credit in that anymore. Anyways, Alan Moore talked about like how much more terrifying it probably is that a lot of conspiracies aren't real, because the chaotic universe that we have, the chaos is worse, than any conspiracy. So I'm just going to leave it at that, because I think that there could be there's obviously people using this as a means to enrich themselves and push their agendas. And, the right wing and the left wing have these different dichotomies with regards to the virus. They're both pushing their own hysteria in a way. So like the right is pushing a hysteria of economic collapse. The left is pushing this death narrative from the virus, and neither are right. It's somewhere in the middle, and that's what I have to say about that. Please comment on this video. Let me know what you think. If I'm full of shit, let me know. If you have statistics about whatever, you can post it. I'm just stating my opinion. It's the way people would say, well, it's the way you have to deal with this because you're so mad about your life being interrupted by this, so you're leaning towards these conspiracy theories and right-wing ideas. Blah, blah. No, I just question things, and I always have, and I always will.